Fantastic. So it's 10:30. So I am going to welcome those of you who have joined to this webinar, and we're going to be talking about effective support for young people preparing for adulthood, and particularly focusing on developing person-centered outcomes and looking at a support sequence as well. So this is a webinar hosted by Contact in partnership with Helen Sanderson Associates, and I'll introduce myself a little in a second and tell you a bit more about me. It's for NHS England and Improvement North East and Yorkshire. I'm Ben Rosamond. I'll tell you a bit about my background in a second, but before I do that, I'm just going to go through some slides, some housekeeping. And I do need to tell you that I am sitting at home and typically have workmen turned up today. So you might hear some background noise, so I need to apologise for that straight away. So if you do hear banging going on and it sounds like the ceiling's coming in, that's what it is. So please don't worry. So welcome to this Contact webinar. If there is a technical hitch, please do bear with us. GoWebinar is a new format for me, but I have Claire, who is helping me out today from Contact, and she is looking after all things tech. So she's in the background making sure everything works. But if there is a technical hitch, please do bear with us. Claire and I are in very different places, located in different places, so we will do our best to help you out with anything that comes up. Those of you joining by PC, laptop, tablet or smartphone should now be able to see this slide and the slides that are coming up. So if you can't, if you let Claire know via the chat, she will try and help you out with that. Timing and questions. As there are so many attendees and it's exciting to see the numbers creeping up. I've got a number in front of me and see that creeping up. So it's exciting to have so many of you here listening today. But please, you'll remain muted throughout, so you won't be able to ask anything vocally, but there are options to ask questions. So please use the question mark icon on your webinar toolbar to ask a question, and they'll go straight to Claire, and we'll have some time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. So please ask any questions using the question mark icon in the webinar toolbar, and Claire will receive those questions. As I said before, my name is Ben Rosamond. I'm an associate with Helen Sanderson Associates, and I'm really excited to be here talking to you today and having the opportunity to do that through the GoToWebinar. It's incredibly exciting to be able to do stuff, so much stuff virtually, and one of the things I guess that has been a benefit of the last year, which has certainly been a strange one. My background is predominantly working in the social care sector, but I've also worked in education and in health as well. So my background is working in the North East for over 20 years for the local authority in Sunderland, carrying out a range of different roles in provider services and workforce development. My background with HSA is the last 5 years I've worked as an associate delivering training and consultancy across the UK in relation to anything to do with social care, health, education, but a real focus on supporting young people and families to develop really excellent person-centered plans and supporting people to think in a person-centered way and communicate differently. So that's my background. I also work with an organisation called Wellbeing Teams, and that's linked to Helen Sanderson Associates, and we are delivering person-centered support using self-management practices as well. So really excited to be involved with that too. So the context of today's session and what I'm going to be talking about and focused on is about developing, how do we develop outcomes that include what's important to a young person and give them the best opportunity to move into adulthood, making sure that we're focused on what really matters to young people and give them the best opportunity to move into adulthood, including the stuff that really matters, and with the best possible support to achieve those things. And so the context for this, really, one of the biggest education reforms in a generation for children and young people with special education and special educational needs became law on Monday, the 1st of September, some time ago now, 2014. So those reforms have been with us for some time, and we're still working hard to make sure that we are putting those reforms into practice with everything, the aspirational reforms that they were. So outcomes are a huge part of those reforms, thinking about how do we develop outcomes that move young people into adulthood with a real focus on what matters to them being at the core of the outcomes that we write. And so we're talking about preparing for adulthood and the outcomes that can help people, help young people to do that really effectively. Now, the Preparing for Adulthood website has loads of great resources around supporting young people to prepare for adulthood well. And this graphic is a graphic that I really like, that explains what we're trying to achieve when we're supporting young people to prepare well for adult life. And if you see the areas that are broken down into good health, employment, independent living and housing, friends, relationships and community. So we're trying to think about how do we support young people to have the best opportunities in those areas of their life. Thinking about supporting young people right from early years all the way through to thinking about when those young people are in year 9 and moving towards adulthood with the best possible life opportunities and particularly focused in those areas. So the outcomes that we develop need to reflect how do we make sure we understand what matters to young people in relation to those areas of their life, and how do we make sure we get the support right based on what's important to those young people. So what do we mean by being person-centered? And I've mentioned that term a number of times already as I've been talking. And we're talking about a process of continual listening and learning, focusing on what is important to someone now and in the future, and then acting upon this in alliance with their family and friends. So being person-centered is about how we continually listen and learn from what people are telling us. And we listen in lots of different ways. So not only what people are telling us with their voice, but also how people are behaving, how they're acting, how they're responding in certain situations. We're listening to what that young person is telling us consistently. And then we're focusing on what is important to that person now and then for the future as well. So really trying to understand what is it that matters, who matters, where matters, and what does a good future look like for the person, and really trying our best to understand that so that we can support somebody to move in that direction. And then acting on what we're hearing. So being person-centered is about listening and learning, but then action as well. So how do we act in alliance with the people who love, care and support the person to make sure we've got the best opportunity to make a difference in the young person's life as they move into adulthood with the best possible support in place. So when we're talking about outcomes, and particularly a person-centered outcome, what is it that we mean? What are we describing? So a person-centered outcome is something that a person wants to change or achieve. So we need to understand what is it that that person wants to change? What is it that they want to achieve in their life? And how can we put the support in place to move the person in the right direction? So having the information about what needs to change or stop happening, having the information about the direction of travel from that young person, where is it they want to go? What is it that they want to achieve in the future? And if we haven't got that information, it's impossible to write outcomes that are going to move people in the right direction and address the things that we need to change or stop happening. An outcome, person-centered outcome, should be written from a personal perspective, describing how the person wants their life to be. So we need to think about the language that we're using to develop outcomes and write outcomes to make sure that they're meaningful for the young people involved, and families as well, and everybody involved. What are we describing in relation to a positive change? How are we describing success and making sure people buy into that because they understand what it means, and it's they put value in it and it means something to them because we've described it in a way that they can access. And then the person or those around them must have some control or influence over the outcomes that we write. So we do not want to be setting people up to fail, and being person-centered is about transparency and building relationships based on trust. So the person and those around them, the people involved in developing and writing the outcome or outcomes, must have some control or influence over that outcome and whether it can be achieved or not. It can address something that isn't working or move the person towards their desired future. So again, we need to understand what's not working at that point in time to make sure that we can address what's not working in the young person's life and move them closer to their desired future. So being really clear about what that future looks like, what is it that's not working right now, how do we write outcomes that address what's not working and move people closer to a future that they want. And is it measurable and specific? So being really clear that we need to be able to measure whether we've been successful or not, and we can only do that if we're writing outcomes in a specific way that describe exactly what the positive change is, the positive change that we want to see. What is that? How do we describe that in a specific way? So when we come to review our progress, we know whether we've been successful or not, or whether we're making progress towards achieving the outcome with the young person. So what are the questions that people ask us when we're helping them to think about outcomes and develop outcomes? So one of the questions that people ask is, have we described an outcome or a potential solution? So being really clear that an outcome describes the positive change that we want to see, not how we're going to get there. So the solutions, the actions, the provision that we put in place are the things that we're going to do, the things that we're going to change, the things that we're going to pay for. It might be free, but we're going to put something in place. We're going to act in a different way to work towards achieving the outcome. And the outcome is the positive change when we get there. What does that look like? So there's a question there about how do we describe outcomes and not fall into the trap of actually describing a potential solution. And if we get caught up in that trap, we can miss some of the opportunities that exist to help us achieve outcomes in the best possible way. Another question is, how do we make sure outcomes are not led by the school or services? So if the young person's in school, making sure that the outcomes really come from understanding what matters to the young person, that they're driven by what's important to them, and that we don't fall into the trap of outcomes being led by services, so that the young person doesn't buy into the outcomes. And as well, family and parents. We need to make sure that outcomes are a joint effort, that we're coming together to really describe what it is that's important to the person about this aspect of their life, and that's clearly written in the outcome as well. And how do we make sure that outcomes are meaningful to young people and families? So if we're writing about the stuff that's important, the stuff that really matters, then that's how we make outcomes really meaningful. So we need to think about, have we got the information we need before we can start developing outcomes that include that information? And how do we know if we've been successful? So how do we make sure the outcomes that we write clearly state what success looks like, and how do we go about measuring the success towards those outcomes, whether we've achieved the outcome or whether we're making progress towards it as well? So there's some key questions that people ask us in relation to developing outcomes when we're working in that area. So this is the outcome sequence. This is our latest thinking in relation to outcomes, and we've focused a lot on outcomes over the years, not only since the Children and Families Act became legislation, but also prior to that, when we're thinking about developing good support plans that have the person right at the core of that plan, then outcomes are a really key part of that, describing what the positive change is for the person. So this is the outcome sequence that we developed, and it's got 5 steps, and it takes us through a process of making sure we've got the information that we need to start with. We understand the person as a unique human being and what makes them tick, so we can be really clear our outcomes are going to be focused on what matters to that person, and that we're moving them to a place where they want to be. It helps us understand the current reality. So what is the current reality based on the people involved supporting the person themselves? What is it that is working and not working from different perspectives? And how can we be clear what the current reality is for the person in relation to what's working and not working for them? So outcomes really focus on challenging and addressing some of the things that aren't working for that young person. And then what is the positive change that we want to see? So being really clear that we want to describe a positive change and address the what's not working, moving someone towards a future that they want. And then can we write that in a specific way so that we can measure whether we've been successful or not? And then step 5, we've got a checklist. There's a number of checks there to be really clear that we've got an outcome we can be confident has the person at the center, and that it's describing the positive change that we're confident is going to make a difference to that young person in their life. So that's what we're looking to achieve by following those 5 steps. So thinking about the first step, which is understanding what matters, who matters, where matters. It's the person-centered information that is essential to start with before we start trying to develop outcomes that are person-centered and meaningful for a young person as they move towards adulthood. So how do we capture that information? And one of the ways that we can do that is through one-page profiles. And one-page profiles are a very straightforward, simple, but very powerful tool that describes what makes somebody tick, what makes somebody unique, what is important to that person, and how do we deliver the best possible support for them. This is my own one-page profile, and you'll see it's got 3 sections in there, what people like and admire about me. So there's information about strengths and qualities, what's important to me, what really matters, and how to support me best as well. And one-page profiles are an incredibly simple but very powerful tool if they're created in the right way, and they can help us get that information to start with about what matters, who matters, where matters. It's a great starting point for developing outcomes or any kind of planning. One-page profiles have been around for a long time, and we've done a lot of work in helping people develop really good one-page profiles so we can be confident we're starting with the right information about the person and that's unique, and it helps us understand who they are before we start developing outcomes with the person. This is my daughter Eleanor's first one-page profile, and Eleanor's 4 years old now, but my wife and I developed this when Eleanor was 6 months. And we first had developed a one-page profile for Eleanor to try and help those people around her understand more about how to support her best when she was very tiny. And it's an incredibly powerful tool when you start thinking about how you share that information. What does it mean for the person and the support that they can receive, and how people understand them as well. And Eleanor's now in school. She's 4, as I say. She started reception. She's had a one-page profile to start nursery, to start school, and it's been a great tool to introduce her to those new services and settings and help the team of people working with Eleanor to understand her best. And it's really helped us as parents to feel confident that they have the people supporting Eleanor have great information to be able to respond in a really bespoke and tailored way and deliver the support that she needs and understand her as the unique little person that she is. And I sincerely hope that Eleanor has a one-page profile when she's 10 years old, when she's 15, when she's 20, as she moves into adult life, that empowers her to be able to talk about and describe the kind of support that she needs in detail in all aspects of her life, and making sure people are really clear about what really matters to Eleanor as well. So when we're talking about developing outcomes for young people who are preparing for adulthood, it really starts as early as possible. And if we can start talking about this stuff in early years, and we can start having conversations with children, with young people, with families, with the professionals involved, about aspirations, about what's important to individuals and what makes them tick, then it means that our conversations about developing outcomes when young people get to year 9, age 14, they're different conversations. Conversations start in a different place if we've got that information to talk about, and practicing that as early as possible is a really good way to spend our time and energy. So a one-page profile has 3 sections. It has a section about appreciation, qualities, what people like, admire, appreciate about the person. It has a section all about what's important, so what matters, might be people, places, possessions, interests or hobbies, the stuff that brings us joy. So it's information about all about the person, and information about the best possible support for that person. How do we respond in a really bespoke, person-centered way to deliver the support for that person in all sorts of different situations? And it's only 1 page, but it's incredibly powerful because of its simplicity. and it can be an incredible tool to support people in a person-centered way, and think about making sure outcomes are really focused on what matters to the person. What's really important when we are gathering the information that we need to start with to start developing outcomes is that we've got really good person-centered information, and that means that we need detail. So the detail is what gives us the unique information about the person. So rather than writing family, which is clearly important to me, I've got family involved in my life who are all very important, but being really detailed about that. So my daughter Eleanor and my wife Sam are so important to me. It's important that I get to spend as much time as possible with Eleanor and Sam, and we love to get out walking together at the weekend, which is completely different information from just writing family, so you'll see there. And very luckily, over the last year, I've spent more time with Eleanor and Sam than I ever have before, so be careful what you wish for. Okay, and is it specific? So have we got information that clearly describes what matters to the person? And does it describe specifically what good support looks like if it's in that section about best support? So rather than to play football regularly, my one-page profile says to play football at least once a week, each Tuesday evening with the friends that I've known for years. It helps me to stay fit physically and mentally. So there's really specific information about my love of football and how it's involved in my life. And thinking about, is it useful information? So when we're collecting person-centered information, is it helpful? Is it useful? Does it help us understand the person better, communicate with them better, or understand how we need to support them in a bespoke way? So I like being active. It's not helpful, it's not useful to anybody to understand me better as a unique individual, but being active has always been a passion of mine. Sport of some variety has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. I like the social aspect, but it also helps me feel good about myself. Favorites at the moment include football and cycling, so it's completely different when written like that, rather than having I like being active. It means that it's unique to me, and it's specific, it's detailed, and it's useful information for somebody, the reader, to understand me better, to know me better as a unique human being. So that's when we're thinking about good quality information, collecting that information, potentially using a one-page profile as a tool to do that. But how do we capture the information that we need to be starting in a place of understanding about that person and what makes them unique before we can start thinking about the outcomes that are going to include what matters to the person? And when we've got that information, it means that conversations start in a different place. It means we've got a balance of information between what we understand is important for a person to keep them healthy, safe and well. And we've got lots of systems in place that help us to do that. So young people will be within the education system. They might have health professionals involved. They might have social care professionals that are supporting that person to remain healthy, safe and well, and think about moving towards their potential in relation to their education, and all the assessments and the systems that we've got in place to help us to do that. But what we sometimes neglect is an understanding about what really matters to the child or young person. What brings them joy, happiness, what makes them fulfilled and content? What's the stuff that they would really miss if it wasn't there? And that might be the people and the places, the interests and the hobbies. But we need to capture that information to really be confident we've got a good balance of information so that the conversation can start in a different place when we're talking about the outcomes that we want to develop, and we want to support that young person towards a future that they want as well. So being really clear, we've got that information to start with before we start a conversation about what outcomes look like. Now, do we understand their aspirations? So being really clear that we've got a good understanding of what a positive future looks like from the person's perspective. So how do we go about making sure we're really clear about the direction of travel? Good person-centered outcomes move a person closer to a future that they want. So we need to have an understanding of what that future looks like. Now, aspirations will change right throughout people's lives. We have aspirations when we're very small, And I'm sure you'll all be able to think of the first kind of aspirations that you might have had, whether it be a career, whether it be a job doing something that you might be doing now, you might be doing something completely different. But being asked about aspirations, being asked about what it is that you want to be, that you want to do. And it might be work, but it might also be about relationships. It might be about where you want to live, who you want to live with. All of that kind of information is essential to understand in the best possible way that we can. So talking to young people, children and young people, all about what that future looks like, what is it that they are aspiring to achieve, is absolutely key to developing outcomes that are going to move them towards a future that they want. So being really clear that it's an important part of step one, not only understanding what's important and what matters to the person, but also what's the direction of travel, what is it that they're aspiring to achieve in the future too. So the outcome sequence starts with step one. We've talked about making sure we've got the right information to start with. We're then thinking about the current reality and what that looks like for the person. So what's working and not working from different perspectives, and making sure that our outcomes are based on that reality and that they can address the stuff that's not working for the person. And we might be developing outcomes that are keeping stuff working. So if there's stuff working really well for a young person, and we know that we need to make sure that that continues to happen, then developing outcomes based on what we know is working is important too. Being clear that we want to celebrate the stuff that's working as well. And also, when we understand what's working, it might help us to address some of the stuff that isn't. So really understanding what's working as well as what's not working, so that our outcomes really reflect the current reality of what's going on for the person. Now, this is a person-centered thinking tool that's focused on understanding exactly that, what's working and not working, starting with the person's perspective. So what is it the person is telling us is working and not working? And we can focus on the preparing for adulthood outcome areas to look at this, to really narrow it down. So when we're thinking about developing outcomes in relation to employment and further education, living independently and housing, being part of community and having friendships and relationships and good health, and there may be other areas that we want to look at as well, depending on the person and their situation. We're asking for different perspectives about what's working and not working, starting with the young person, but also hearing from family and parents, hearing from the staff or the other professionals that are involved as well. So we've got a really good understanding from everybody's perspective about what's working and what's not. And then the conversation about the outcomes that we develop can make sure we're addressing the stuff that's not working and build on the stuff that's working for the young person as well. And when we've got that understanding from different perspectives, our conversations are different, and we're developing outcomes based on how people feel, what people see, what people are hearing about the current reality and what's going on for that young person right now. Now, when we come to writing outcomes, we've got good information to start with, we've got a good understanding of the current reality. Writing an outcome that avoids embedding a solution is really important. So you go back to what I was talking about earlier in relation to outcomes describing a positive change, and being clear that there's a difference between the outcomes that we write and the solutions that we come up with to get there. So being clear we've got an outcome that describes a positive change rather than describing a potential solution or an action is really important. So when we talk about a solution, potential solution, it could be the resource that you need to achieve your outcome. It could be an item or an activity that you're going to put in place, something that you're going to do, or something that you're going to purchase, or something that you're going to acquire to help the person achieve their outcome. It can have a cost associated with it, or it could be free. So it could be something that we're just going to do differently that's completely free. There might be a cost associated with it where we're looking for some funding to achieve that as well. But a potential solution is something that we're putting in place to achieve the outcome. So when we write the outcome, we're describing the change, the positive change. A solution is how we're going to achieve it. So a good way to remember it is an outcome is the what and not the how. An outcome describes what we're going to see that's different, the positive change, how we're going to be successful. how we're going to get there are the potential solutions, the actions, the provision we might put in place to help us get to that outcome. And what's really important about that is that if we think we've got an outcome, but we're actually describing a potential solution, we can lose sight of all the other things that we could potentially do to help us get to that outcome. And when we write outcomes, what we're trying to do by describing the positive change is give us the opportunity to explore lots of different avenues to think, how can we help this young person get to where we want to be, get to achieve the outcome that we've described. And there's always lots of different ways we can do that. And by writing a positive change, we give ourselves the opportunity to explore all of those different opportunities to achieve the outcome. Another common mistake when writing outcomes is that we're not specific enough. We don't describe the positive change in a way that we can measure whether we've been successful or not. So what's really important is when we come back to review an outcome that we've written, and we're moving a young person towards the outcome, helping them move into adulthood in a really positive way. If we don't describe the outcome in a specific enough way, we have no idea whether we've achieved it or not. So if we're too general, if we're too generic, we're not going to be clear that we've achieved the outcome that we've written, or whether we're making progress towards achieving that outcome. So really important that we think about how we describe the positive change that we want to see, and that we've written that in a way that we can measure our success. So being able to see when we review outcomes that we're making a difference, we've made a difference over the period of time that we've set the outcome. Have we made a difference? Have we achieved what we set out to do? So being clear that we need to write outcomes in a specific enough way to do that. And another key mistake is about not linking up the information that we've collected about what matters to the young person with the outcomes that we write. So putting energy and effort into understanding what really matters to a young person, then making sure that the outcomes that we write reflect what matters to the young person is really important. So all of that effort of trying to understand the person in the best possible way that we can, and then not writing an outcome that links back to that information, we're missing a trick. We're missing the point of what a person-centered outcome is all about. So we need to make sure when we're writing an outcome, we're reflecting on what is important to the young person about this particular area of their life that we're writing the outcome in, so that link should be really clear. We've got a really good one-page profile. It should be clear that the outcomes we write reflect what's important to the young person about that particular aspect of their life. So whether it be about people and relationships, whether it be about further education or employment or housing, really clear what is it that matters to the young person about this particular thing, and the outcome needs to be really descriptive, to really describe what it is that matters to the young person. So here's some examples. I'm going to look at a few examples over the next slide, and we've got what's not working, and then we've got an example of what's important to the young person about this particular aspect of their life, and we'll look at some examples of outcomes. So what's not working in this situation is that James is lonely and doesn't spend time with people his own age outside of school. What we know is important to James is that he loves to play on Xbox Live and watch films, and he wants to make friends. So what's not working is lonely, doesn't spend time with people his own age outside of school. And what's important to James, he loves to play on his Xbox and watch films, and he wants to make friends. So an example of a not so good outcome might be that James will spend more time with friends, and that might be quite a straightforward outcome to write. We think, oh yeah, it's about friendships, it's about relationships. That's a good outcome. That's what we're aiming to achieve. But actually, that outcome isn't specific. It's not measurable because we don't understand what more time means. So we wouldn't know when we come back to review that whether we've been successful or not. And we've described friends in there, and friends are really difficult to guarantee. So when we're thinking about how we can support James to develop friends and relationships, what we might write instead of that example is that James will spend time with people his own age at least twice each week outside of school, doing the things he loves to do. James loves gaming and going to the cinema. So we've been really explicit about the stuff that matters to James about this particular aspect of his life, and we've been really clear about what we're trying to achieve so that James will spend time with people his own age at least twice each week outside of school doing the things that he loves to do. And that's something that we can measure. So we came back to look at that outcome in 6 months, in 12 months time, then we could be really clear and ask ourselves, is this happening for James? Is this outcome making a difference? What do we see that's different to when we started out? And it's really explicit about what's important to James about that. So another example, what's not working is that Michael does not have the independent living skills needed to transition to college. What's important to Michael about this is that he wants to be more independent. So an example might be Michael will develop independent living skills. So what's not so good about this example is that, again, it's really generic. It's difficult to measure. We don't know what independent living skills look like for Michael. It's probably language that Michael doesn't particularly engage with or use. So we might be able to write that in a different way, in a way that Michael would understand, and people involved supporting Michael would understand as well. And we could be really specific about what being independent for Michael in this particular example looks like. So if we were to write, Michael will catch the bus to college with his friends every day. It's a completely different way of writing a similar thing, but it's specific. So it's about catching the bus. We can be really clear that for Michael, being independent starts with this particular thing. So we can start thinking about how we support Michael to achieve catching the bus to college with his friends and doing that every day. Okay, so one more. So we're looking at Jack. This is what's not working, is Jack is struggling with maths and he needs to get a grade C to access apprenticeships. What's important to Jack is that he loves to work with cars. So what's not working? Jack's struggling with maths, needs to get a grade C to access apprenticeships. What's important to Jack? He loves to work with cars. So a not so good example might be that Jack will achieve 4 GCSEs at grade C and above, including maths and English. Now, if we were to write that for Jack, we're not really being clear about what those GCSEs are all about. So we want to be really clear that what's important to Jack is about that he's working with cars. And also in terms of being clear about what it is that we want to see Jack achieve, it's not necessarily about the exam results, but we know that Jack wants to be working with cars. So if we were to write, Jack has the training and the experience he needs to work with cars, we're being really clear that what matters to Jack is about working with cars. We need to make sure that he has the training and the experience to be able to do that. And that might involve his GCSEs, but that might be one of the potential targets, the solutions that we put in place to help Jack work towards what he really wants to do. Be really clear that it's the important thing for Jack is about working with cars. Okay, so when we're looking through the outcome sequence, we've looked at step 1, we've looked at the current reality in step 2. We're starting to think about what the positive change is that people want to see and the importance of writing an outcome like that rather than falling into the trap of writing potential solutions. And we've focused on the importance of being specific so that we can measure our progress and whether we've achieved the outcomes that we've written with the young person or not. And then we've got step 5, which is our checks. But how do we write outcomes from what's not working? So here's some examples of when we understand what's not working, moving to the positive change, and then making sure we can write something that's specific so we can measure it. So in this example, what's not working is that I feel embarrassed that mum and dad always have to come to gym, dancing and swimming with me. I want to go without them like my friends. I have hip and heart problems, which means that I need support to stay safe. The positive change in this scenario for this young person is doing activities without their mum and dad. To make it specific, if we were to write to attend my gymnastics, dancing and swimming lessons safely each week without my mum and dad, we're describing the positive change in a way that we can measure whether we've achieved that or not. And we're not falling into the trap of describing a potential solution, not describing how we're going to achieve that, but actually what it is that we want to see. Second example, I can't read my favorite football blog as I rely on others to help me or join in playing card games with my mates. I want to be able to play these games with my friends. Now, the positive change that we want to see is to improve that person's reading, and in making that specific, to improve the level of my reading so I can read on my own like my friends can. And this will mean I can read my favorite football blog, and it will also help me with my college work as well. Being really clear about what it is that's important to that young person in that situation, in that scenario, but also being clear about it's improving the person's reading as well, but being clear about why that young person wants to improve their reading. So there's a process to go through from understanding what's not working, what is it that's the positive change that we want to see, how can we write that in a way that's specific so we can measure whether we've been successful or not. Now then, so we get to the stage where we're confident we've got a really good outcome that is person-centered. It reflects what matters to the young person. It really describes specifically what we're looking to achieve so that we can measure whether we've been successful or not. Now, this is the support sequence, and the support sequence was developed as a way of looking at all the potential solutions available to a young person and the people around them supporting them. And it starts with the person themselves. So step one, that the orange, it's actually quite yellow, isn't it? Orangey yellow. Step one is thinking about what can the young person do themselves to engage in working towards the outcomes that we've set. So being really clear that the outcomes that we develop need to include how the young person is going to achieve those outcomes, work towards achieving them. We want outcomes to be meaningful for young people. We want them to buy in. We want them to see value in the outcomes that we write, and see potential in how they can be involved in achieving the outcomes that we write with young people. So how can the person build on the strengths and qualities that they already have? What else could they do to improve their knowledge, skills, or confidence? How is it that they can be involved in working towards achieving the outcomes that we set? We've got step number two, thinking about technology. Are there any apps or technology that can help? Incredible amount of off-the-shelf tech that we can look at using to help us support somebody to achieve outcomes at the moment. And a whole range of applications that we'll all use in our lives that can help young people to move towards the outcomes that we set with them as well. Number three is equipment and adaptations. So are there any products or equipment that could help us work towards the outcomes that we've set? Are there any physical changes that could be made to the home or the environment that could help that young person, depending on the outcome, obviously, that we've set as well? And thinking about family, friends, and neighbours. So is there anything that family, friends, or neighbours could help with? When we're looking at developing ideas around solutions and support, we're thinking about how do we involve everybody in that? How do we make sure that it's everybody's business to support the young person towards a positive change, including the professionals around them, including the people involved in their circle of support, and clearly that means family, friends, neighbours as well. So how do we make sure we understand who are the people in that young person's network, and how do we get them involved in supporting the young person? And then we've got community. So are there any places, groups, or events happening in that young person's local community that we can tap into? Any support available to them there? We've got the services or settings. So if they're in school, if they're in college, how do we make sure that we're clear about what the school, what the college can do to support the person, support that young person as well? That might mean that there's additional support required. It might mean reasonable adjustments or a change to the support that the young person's getting. And it might be to do with the curriculum as well, and what they're studying. And then we've got, last but not least, we've got support. So thinking about, is there any additional support required? So for a young person with an education, health and care plan, that might be changes to the way that they're supported. It might mean application for additional support. It could be social care support as well. So we're thinking about what is the support that's required for the young person to work towards the outcomes that we've set. And looking at a support sequence in this way, it means that we're not jumping straight to thinking about what's the support that the person needs in relation to school or social care or professionals, but we're looking at all the potential options for the other ways to support that young person as well. Starting with themselves and what they can do, thinking about technology, equipment and adaptations, the family, friends and neighbours that they might have involved in their life, the community, thinking about services and the setting that they're in, and the support that they might be entitled to, that might be additional to what's already in place. So the support sequence is a way of working through step by step, thinking about, now we've described our positive change, how can we achieve it with this young person? What are the options available to us? And it really provides a way of opening up those potential options for the young person. So an example for this young person, this is Carl, and Carl's outcome is that he can travel to and from school on the bus each day with his friends and that he feels safe to do so. But if we look at these examples of using the support sequence, starting with Carl himself, one of the things that Carl might be able to do is take photos of the bus route to school. We're engaging with Carl, thinking about how can Carl get involved in working towards the outcome that we've set. So taking photos of the bus route to school is something that Carl could get involved with doing. And then technology. So we could download the Find My Friends app or the Life 360 app to a smartphone so that Carl's parents can track his whereabouts. So we've got GPS on his phone. It might be something that we could do to make sure parents and Carl feel safe about Carl moving to this, traveling to school on the bus each day. And then we've got equipment and adaptation. So travel support card to alert the driver in case Carl requires assistance while traveling could be something that we could look at in that situation as well. Family, friends and neighbours, mum or dad travel with Carl at the weekends on the bus until he knows the route, till he gets used to it. We've got engagement from mum and dad in terms of thinking about what they could do as well. And community, so finding out where the safe spaces are locally en route. So looking at where Carl might be able to go and be safe if he needed that, that opportunity to find somewhere that was safe. And services or settings, so school travel training program, thinking about how Carl could engage in the travel training program at school. And then additional support would be looking at eligibility for any social care funding. Potentially Carl might be able to employ a personal assistant if he was eligible for support in that way to accompany Carl until he was confident to travel. So you can see how the support sequence helps us to look at all the potential options that could be available to a young person in their situation, but starting with a really clear outcome where we've described the positive change in a way that we can measure whether we're being successful, describing exactly what it is that's important to the person as well, and then working through that support sequence to look at all the potential opportunities for the young person and the people involved in their support to be successful. Okay, so reviewing progress. So what's really important is that when we've set outcomes, that we've been really clear about what success looks like. So that starts with how we write the outcome and making sure that we're specific. We're describing what we want to see in a specific way. But we can also look at how we review progress and thinking about what targets we might set towards that outcome. So if we're setting an outcome for 12 months within the school year, what are the targets that we want to see? And it might be that we set targets for 3 months. You know, we want to see this in 3 months' time to know that we're on track. We might set a target for 6 months' time just to check whether we're on track to working towards that outcome or not. And then we can address anything that we're unhappy about, that we're concerned about, before we actually get to the stage where if it's 12 months' time, we come back together, we're looking at the outcome that we've developed, and it's clear that after 3 months' time, we were going in the wrong direction, or the things that we were looking to measure were telling us, you know, there was some things that we needed to tweak or change to make sure that we were on the right track. One of the ways that we can do that is using a tool called 4+1 questions, and this is a great tool to measure our progress towards the outcomes that we set. So we can ask, what have we tried so far? What have we learned about what we've tried? What are we really pleased about? What can we celebrate is going well? And what are our concerns? Do we have any concerns in relation to what's not working about moving towards the outcome that we've set? And then we can set clear actions about what we need to do next. So it's a great way to review the outcomes that we've set before we actually come back and look at the outcome in relation to the time frame that we've set that outcome to achieve. Okay, I'm aware that we are nearly at time up. So I want to talk a little bit just before we offer the opportunity for some questions about what we've learnt about applying this approach. So we've developed some tools and resources to help people think about developing good person-centered outcomes and using the support sequence. So those resources include checklists and graphics and workbooks that people can use in a practical way to work through real case scenarios. We are also delivering some interactive workshops because what we know is that people really appreciate trying these tools out in groups together and learning together. So we're delivering some online interactive workshops that are available to anybody who might be involved supporting a young person with developing outcomes and using the support sequence. We also know that what works really well is coaching. So we are delivering some coaching support on a one-to-one basis, and also with teams working in education and social care. We've just been working with Rochdale and Oldham social work teams to use these tools with real life scenarios when they are supporting young people and families to think about how the tools can work most effectively for them in those situations and scenarios. So we're doing lots of work about using these tools, looking at how they work best, how we can support people to apply the approach with the checklists and the workbooks that we've got available. So if anybody is interested to learn more about any of the stuff that we're doing around outcomes and the support sequence, then I'll make sure that Claire gets that information out to you if you're interested to know more about that stuff. I'm gonna move on to questions now. So I'm just gonna check the chat to see if we've got any questions in there and see if Claire has messaged me any questions. Okay, let me just check, see if I can. So we've got one question, I think, and Claire will put me right if that's not right, but I've got a question about what would you do if a young person's aspirations at 16 are unrealistic? So it's a really good question in relation to when we're looking at outcomes, being really clear about what's important to the person. It's important that we are listening to what people tell us, and we get all sorts of what I would describe as, well, maybe they are unrealistic, but I guess until we try, we don't know. But when people, what we need to do is make sure we're listening to what young people are telling us, and then we're looking at what's important to the person about that particular thing, but also balancing that with what we know is important for a person, and being open and honest and transparent about what we can achieve. If you remember, one of the things that we talked about in relation to person-centered outcomes was making sure that we have influence or control over whether the outcome is achieved or not. So before we enter into that conversation, we really need to understand what it is that is important to the young person. So if we've got somebody who's 16 who's talking to us about this really matters to me, this is something that I'm really passionate about, or this is what I want to achieve, but we've got some concerns about how realistic it is to achieve, we need to really look at those first steps and think about, well, what's the first steps in relation to working towards this aspiration? What's the first steps to doing that? And can we explore what that looks like using the support sequence and think about where we can get to? You know, I think unrealistic goals and all of those kind of things start right from early years, and we hear all sorts of things that we might feel are unrealistic. But what's really important is that we're listening to children, young people, and what they have to tell us, because if it's important to them, it's important to them. So we need to listen to what people are saying, and then we need to have those conversations about what's within our influence and control to achieve, what's our first steps, and explore that stuff as well. So hopefully that's helped answer that one. We've got a few more questions here as well. How do we engage teams to implement the tools such as one-page profiles? So we're doing a lot of work at the moment to support teams to implement the tools. As I say, we have got some resources that we can share with people that guide people on how to do that. We've tried to create tools that are straightforward to use, and hopefully they can be really helpful for teams. One-page profiles in particular, you know, the best way to start implementing one-page profiles is to do your own and think about what that would look like. And then supporting people to think what's the difference that this information can make. So having a strategy about how to implement one-page profiles in teams is a really good way to go. We have lots of support and guidance around that. If people want to know more about how to develop one-page profiles at scale, I'd be happy to share information with people on that as well. If you just let Claire know we can share some information with you around that. But it's actually it's a great starting point is developing your own and thinking about how does this impact us as a team in terms of how we support each other, how we communicate, and what difference would that make for the people that we're involved supporting as well. We've got another one that says, how would you help young people who are unsure about what they want to do with their lives, like the kind of things they want to do when they leave school? Really excellent question. When we're talking about the importance of understanding aspirations and what's important to young people for the future, those conversations can be really tough. And just asking a young person what they want to do with their life, asking anybody what they want to do with their life is a really difficult thing to think about. So it's about how do we start those conversations as early as possible. What's the best way to do that? Being sensitive to the fact that that might be more difficult for some people than others. Who are the best people to start those conversations? It might be a number of different people having conversations at different times about what the future looks like. And what we can learn from when we understand what's important to somebody, what matters to them, people, places, possessions, interests and hobbies, that can often give us some ideas about what the future might look like for the person as well, help them think about what's important in their life and what they want to be involved in their life moving forward as well. So good information about what matters now can help us to think and support the person to think about the future as well. And it might be, it might be a short-term aspiration, but what's really important is our outcomes are going in the right direction, moving the person in the right direction. So having some conversations about what that looks like is really important. And when we've got good information about what matters to them, that can really help start those conversations in the right place to think about what matters in the future as well. Okay, hopefully that's I've got another one. I love this concept, but how can this work in partnership with our local council, who are often reluctant to fund services, etc.? So another good question, and there's challenges in relation to how this approach can work within the constraints of funding and what's available for people. But I hope that you see when we look at the support sequence, it isn't just about funding, and it's about how do we look at all the potential opportunities to achieve outcomes within the assets and the resources that are available to the young person. And that can be an incredible amount of things and opportunities that are available to somebody. But until we start looking and exploring what they are, then we won't know what could be potentially possible. So I think there are challenges in relation to constraints around funding, but if we go through a process where we're really clear that something is required and the person's eligible to receive that, it's a much better way to go when we've explored all the potential opportunities to achieve the outcomes that we set, rather than starting at 6 or 7, the conversations about support starting at 6 or 7, we're starting at 1 with the person themselves and then working around that support sequence. Gives a much better opportunity of success as well if we can do it that way, and then we can be really clear about what it is that we need to apply for in terms of additional support or funding in that situation. But making sure we've got a consistent understanding of what good outcomes look like and how we can move towards achieving those outcomes, across everybody who's involved in supporting a young person is the first step, really. So how can we make sure that everybody's on the same page with their understanding about what good looks like, starting with what good person-centered information looks like, making sure we're describing positive changes when we're writing outcomes, including what's important, and then looking at how we can support people to get there as well. So that's an important first step. Okay, we've got audience question. Is it possible to get a copy of your presentation to share with my team? I am going to share the presentation in a PDF file with Claire, and Claire has contact information, so she will get that out to you as well. Oh, and Claire's already answered that. I do apologise. Okay, and we've got, I think, time for one more. What do we need to know? What do we need to know? How should we start the process of transition planning? How can we meet other parent carers who are going through it? Who can we get support from? Okay, so another really good question, and starting the preparation for transition planning, if we can start in early years, then absolutely fantastic. you know, starting those conversations there, really important. We start thinking about the future as early as possible. But the you know, key point really, thinking about year 9 when some young person is aged around 13, 14, starting to really focus down on those key life areas when we're looking at preparing for adulthood. You know, there should be a preparing for adulthood review at that stage. If the young person's in school, we should be really focused on what the outcomes look like for a young person in relation to those aspects of their life. So, you know, good health, people and relationships, thinking about further education and employment and housing as well at that stage is really key. So we've got plenty of time to, as that young person moves through school into further education, if that's where they end up, we've got plenty of time to think about that stuff. In relation to other parents who are going through it, who can we get support from? You know, I know locally that the Sunderland carers tend to have a great supportive team who focus on transition, so there's definitely support from there if you're based in Sunderland. Claire might be able to help with that as well, and we do have some information about what Contact can offer as well. But I will also recommend talking to your local school as well, and what is it that they could do in terms of putting people in touch and thinking about support from other parents and families as well. I know that happens in some areas really well. Okay, I think that's all the questions. I'm just going to go back to my slides, and there is some information about further support from Contact here that I'm going to quickly go through. So if you've enjoyed the webinar, you may also be interested to look at the Contact online interactive family workshops as well. I'm sure if you want more information about those, there's a link there that you can find out more info. So topics include encouraging positive behaviour, wellbeing for parent carers, sleep, money matters, handling meetings effectively, education, and lots more as well. And there's a link there to where you can find out more information about that. These topics are also available for parent carer forums, support groups and practitioners to commission us to support the families they work with. And there's a great parent carer forum operating in the Northeast, so I'm sure people know about that. If you don't, go and find out more about parent carer forums. Additionally, we offer online and face-to-face workshops for practitioners on working with parents and carers of children with SEND as well. And for more information on commissioning a workshop or webinar, contact Ellie Goff at contact.org.uk. The listening ear service is a one-to-one listening ear service that might help if you're struggling emotionally and looking for strategies to help you cope. These are telephone appointments with our family support advisors for parents, offering reassurance and practical and emotional support, and can be booked via Eventbrite, and the link is there as well. And Claire's contact email is on the bottom of that slide. And then there's further information and resources available at contact.org.uk on there as well. So it just leaves me to say thank you ever so much for taking the time to log on and listen. I hope that that's been helpful. Please do get in touch if you would like any information about what Helen Sanderson Associates are doing around outcomes and using the support sequence. And also with Contact if you're interested in any of the information that we've just shared in those slides there. Short questionnaire will launch at the end of the webinar. Please take some time to complete it because your feedback is really important to us. Feedback is a gift and it helps us to think about what we deliver and what we can do differently to make it better. And it will help support families and improve future events and training. And the recording of the webinar and the presentation will be available in the next couple of weeks. So look out for news about this on Contact's homepage and social media networks as well. Thank you ever so much for joining us today. Have a really good day and a good week.